Everyone, it's Jerry here. So today we're going to be looking at the professional values statement, which is one part of your Module 1 assignment. Now, to do this, we're going to look at those things that really matter to us as professional teachers and as people, and start to explore the link between the things that we care about and the things that we do, and how we seek, in some ways, consciously or unconsciously, to make true the things that matter to us in the work. And also, because it's part of Module 1 assignments, this is the first assessment piece that you're looking at on the PG Cert. So we're going to take a bit of an overview at the kinds of assessments that you're going to expect on the PG Cert, and break that down a bit for you. So as a quick reminder then of the module structure of the PG Cert, as you know, we've got a 3-module structure. So firstly, we're all currently studying under Module 1. So this is teaching, learning and assessment. And depending on which version of the PG Cert you're currently studying on, whether it's a 1-year or a 2-year course, it'll either be a term or 2 terms you can be studying Module 1. And at the end of that, it's assessed by a 4,000 word written submission, and we'll break that down in a second. So after Module 1, you have, funnily enough, Module 2, which is linking theory and practice, where we explore how we put theoretical ideas into practice and how they inform, underpin and develop our teaching. And then even one stage further, thinking about our practice as teachers, the kinds of the evidence that we can generate from a classroom, building up a sense of a professional opinion where our experience as teachers could then shine a critical light back upon these theoretical ideas that we encounter. And again, that's assessed by a 4,000 word written essay. And finally, at the same time, you're going to study Module 2 and Module 3 concurrently, so alongside each other. And Module 3 is a piece of action research. So it's where you take an area of your professional practice that you really want to improve, perhaps somewhere that's a little disjointed, or it's a bit troublesome for you, something that you really care about. And in that way, it explicitly builds on your professional values as a teacher. And we'll look at that link at the end of this video a bit more. And you use quite a systematic process of research and developmental action to go about generating greater improvement for yourself as a teacher. And that's assessed by a 6,000 word written project report. So let's look a bit more specifically into Module 1 then, and the assessment pieces. Now, as I've said, this is 4,000 word submission, and it's all assessed at the same time, but we've chalked it into 3 kind of separate slices. So professional values is one slice. The other is your main essay section. Now this covers learning outcomes 1 and 2. And we're going to specifically look into other components of the Module 1 assignment in separate sessions, and I'll do separate videos for them as well. But your main essay section is 2,500 words, roughly. The only word count you really have to worry about is the overall 4,000 word submission count. Everything else, they're just recommendations that we found to be particularly useful. Of course, today we're looking at your values statement. Now, we recommend about 1,000 words for that, because it's not quite so deep or critical or academic section. And then finally, a plan for your own continuing professional development throughout the PG Cert. So building on some of the learning that you've generated in your main essay, and based on identifying those key things that are important to you within your values statement, it's then tying them together and thinking forward facing, how do you actually want to continue your growth as a professional? What kind of goals are you going to set yourself? What learning activities are you going to undertake in order to sustain that growth in the right direction? And again, depending on which version, the 1-year or the 2-year that you're currently studying, the submission date is going to be different. So I just urge you to look into your course handbook. That will have all of the assessment deadlines in it. It will have your module outcomes, bibliography. It's got everything you need. It's quite a chewy document, so we've separated the assessment briefs as well. So all you need to do to go to find that is to look onto the course admin and info page on your WordPress blog. So very quickly, the regulations for your word count. This is University of Sussex PG Cert. That's who we're validated with. So we've taken on essentially just their rulings when it comes to assessment regs. Now, what this means is that your own words and you using quotations from academic literature, other professional bodies of work, they are all that you use to generate your word count. So any footnotes you use, your bibliography, quotations, they don't count. Just the same as presenting any kind of numerical data or within a tab or graphs or charts, you don't need to count any of them. So it's essentially just your words and then the quoted words of others. And the essay has to be within a 10% boundary either side. So this is just the same as undergraduate. So if you teach on a University of Sussex degree already, you essentially have the same expectations as those that you're guiding your students through. So what the 10% ban means is that, for example, with your Module 1 essay, you've got a 4,000 word limit, and that means that anywhere between 3,600 and 4,400 words is totally acceptable. So you've got kind of a buffer zone either side. Now, I suppose what I would say is that typically participants find on their PG certs that the word counts are quite restrictive, and that's quite deliberate. That's intending you guys to develop your skill at writing concisely. Really getting to the point and explaining and articulating your kind of quite complex thinking about teaching and learning in a clear and straightforward way. So, throughout these assessments on the PG Cert, while they're academic in the sense that they're drawing upon other theoretical ideas, undertaking research, they don't have to be any kind of I suppose the kind of academic wank that you might expect, right? So there's no particular expectation in terms of specific language that you use, other than the specific terminology of teaching and learning being there to describe the complex situations that arise in our classroom, right? So don't feel you need to take any on any kind of particular voice within the assessments that you're writing. We just want to understand what's going through your head as a teacher, how you're constructing the picture of the classroom and how you're learning from experiences. That's what we really want to see. So within your handbook as well, you're going to find the learning outcomes for your Module 1 assignment. So you've got 4 learning outcomes for Module 1 teaching, learning and assessment. And as you'll see, the first 2 are assessed through the main essay section, and then learning outcomes 3 and 4 are assessed through separate kind of slices of the assignment as we've gone through the values section in your CPD plan. Now, I don't actually want to focus on learning outcomes 1, 2 and 4 within this video, but be assured that we're going to look at them separately over the coming weeks. So learning outcome 3, which concerns your values statement, this asks you to critically discuss your professional values as teachers within post-compulsory education. Now, we can actually take this to mean your professional values within any student supporting role, really. So we're aware that many of our staff participants might work in student support or within a leadership or a curriculum role. So really, you don't have to think about it just in the function of being a teacher. Any way in that you're supporting student learning, I think that's a valid professional role at this point. And actually, we've got agreement from the University of Sussex as well that you can, as long as you can make an explicit claim that these values, are the kind of legitimate values of assisting student learning in the same way that a teacher would be, actually that's fine for us. So similarly, when we talk about post-compulsory education, really, if you're working in a school or in further education, like on a level 3 course, that's totally fine as well. So don't feel that you need to particularly carve out or leave out particular experiences that you have professionally that might be useful to bring into this discussion. And then the assessment, really the brief for this part of your assignment is writing an analytical and self-reflective account of these values that you hold, while also discussing, how do you actually bring them into the work that you do? To what extent are you living by the values that you hold? These kind of espoused values, the ones that we believe in, the ones that we communicate to people. Well, are you actually doing that? What are the challenges involved with you, staying true to your values in moments of difficulty, confusion? Where are the challenges? Where are the gaps? You don't need to solve them yet, by any means. We're not thinking that you need to be some kind of paragon of, value-led brilliance. It's just about a level of critical awareness surrounding how you bring your kind of supporting ideas, your beliefs, into practice. Cool. So what's that actually mean to be a professional then? What was a professional value compared to a personal value, other than fantastic hair, clearly? Well, there are kind of three main definitions that get thrown about whenever we discuss professionalism. And I suppose being professional, can typically be brought down to just actually belonging to a profession. Those kind of like proper jobs where you write your name on the back of a passport and send it off because you're an actual adult. The professions of medicine or education can be codified as a particular professional role. So I suppose doing the same thing as other like-minded people with the same goals, the same values, the same skill sets, that's one definition of professional. And I suppose that carries an implication that these professional people are noticeably more skilled, more knowledgeable, perhaps have greater length of experience, or potentially more led by their values, the sense of a communally held value, than say an amateur or someone that's just starting out, or just being paid for it, right? And I think we can quite easily leave that one out. But the fact of belonging to a particular community of people, doing things to a particular high standard, above a benchmark of amateur, well, that itself commands value. Not a value that particular hold, but the value that other people place in you. Well, I suppose that allows you to command a certain bracket of income within the work that you do. So I suppose some further areas to consider. I think it's about having a much broader knowledge base. So particularly, I think a professional teacher, really knows their stuff. It's like the John Hattie thing. It's not enough to just have a really deep understanding of one particular topic. It's actually about an integrated knowledge base. So knowing both about your subject, broadly and deeply, knowing how it relates to other disciplines, other topics, and also I think a knowledge base regarding teaching and learning, a certain degree of pedagogic knowledge. And that then contributes to the expertise within the work that we do, because it informs the decisions that we make in the room. It informs the decisions and how we work with people, the choices we make. And I think also ethics, particularly in education, we're here to support people. We're here to help people's growth and their learning. And that carries with it a certain duty of care, to their well-being, to their growth and their development. And I think that's true within a lot of other professions. And again, one particular way that I view, personally view professionals, is this idea of them being self-sustaining. It's while they're members of a community, it's like actually they're at a point in their professional lives when they can just go off and do it. So I visualize people that are really committed to their own professional development. You know, I think it's embodied in the idea of teaching practice, or medical practice. You know, we are practitioners. We are still developing. We're still growing, even though we've hit a particular benchmark or we've gone beyond it. We're more skilled. I think it's the knowledge that we're always continually getting better, and it's, for me, professionalism is about a commitment to that. And I suppose a sense of going about your own professional development in a way of being reflective in terms of the successes, the challenges you're facing, a sense of objectivity, and a capacity for regulating your own development, perhaps further than, say, some of the undergraduate students that we might encounter. And I suppose you can also chalk it down to actual membership of a professional community, you know, whether in an informal way, such as the professional music community. There's a certain kind of cultural membership that you gain through being a professional musician. And you can compare that to professionalism within teaching, because there are actual groups, communities of educators that have come together and codified what they do, and set very particular benchmarks, explained within kind of policy documents, as to what constitutes a professional educator within certain disciplines. We'll lead you through one of the professional communities within higher education as well later on today, as well as our professional values. You know, so I think this is particularly what we're looking at now, isn't it? I mean, at its simplest place, I think, you know, values are just those core beliefs, those big concepts that we've decided to place value in, that we've kind of bought into, that in some way guide or underpin the actions that we take professionally. And I think, you know, the analogy of a compass really resonates with me. The idea that, you know, we've got some particular values that then help our kind of direction or our decision making. So I think one of the places in which values become really useful, or kind of essential really, is when you're defining your priorities. You know, in moments when actually there's a lot that you could undertake, a lot that you could do. Well, you know, actually, if you've decided what matters most to you, then the direction's just a little bit more clear. You know, it's like you've got a guiding light in terms of where you're going to spend your energy, where you're going to direct the work that you do. Or similarly, in moments of confusion or less certainty, I think values, you know, really prime our decision making and allow us to make more conscious choices. And similarly, I think, you know, they can be both a compass in where we're going, and, you know, whether consciously or unconsciously, the way we evaluate and reflect on our practice as professionals, well, that's directed by the values that we hold. You know, for example, I really value viewing my students, recognizing them as people, you know, as human beings that are creative, worthwhile of being recognized beyond just being a student in a room, and whole. No, I don't particularly buy into this idea of just viewing your students as, you know, students that are there to learn one thin, narrow slice of a topic, kind of viewing them just as their brains. You know, they're real people. So, you know, when I look back and I reflect upon my teaching, that's, you know, that's one of the big criteria I have in my head. And, you know, if I somehow feel that, you know, my sessions are overly prescriptive, overly narrow, or if my teaching is a bit mechanistic, that's less okay for me. You know, that's actually quite a big trigger point if I think that I'm transgressing that value. So I think whether you're very conscious of what you believe in, or whether it's back here, well, it's still part of the operating system. So, you know, one of the reasons this is a component of the PG Cert is that the more we can recognise those ideas that drive the way we work, the more we can bring them from back here in the operating system to clear it in front of us, the more informed we are, the more conscious we are, and the more we can use these positively within the work that we've got. Might be quite clear on the values that you hold already as a professional. That might be something that you're very conscious of. if that's the case, I'm more than willing to skip these next couple of slides, but I think it's quite useful to just see some examples and to start processing, to get a few thoughts out and some options. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a whole long list of different things that you might look for in the work that you do. And all I want you to do is just think to yourselves or note down, how important is this to you, in the work that you do, whether, particularly we're exploring your educational values. You might also think about the work that you do as a creative professional or within your life generally, but how much do these things matter to you? So for example, enjoyment, within the work that you do you actually really reach for a sense of fun, a sense of getting into it? Is personal satisfaction in that way something that you really strive for and seek? Helping other people, as teachers, I think this is sort of codified within the profession. We're here to help other people's learning, but how important actually is that to you professionally in a wider sense? Seeking friendships or connection with people, or really getting to know them beyond the work itself and into that personal connection. Helping society, so beyond the physical work in the room, actually addressing some of the imbalances or the problems within the wider world. Sense of freedom, autonomy for yourself, being able to make choices, not being so constrained by rules and limitations. Recognition, do you really value actually having the good work that you do recognised by other people? A sense of creativity, a sense of your own freedom and passion in putting that through. A choice over your location, that might be important or not so much to you. Or competition, do you really strive for, do you look for being the best at what you do, perhaps compared to yourself or compared to others? Power and authority might be one that you value highly, actually having the capacity to wield your strength or in some way control and direct things that happen. Achievement, do you really value for success? Compensation, I think quite often we can fall into the trap of sort of denigrating this one within education and thinking that it's all about other people, it's just all about being fluffy and supportive and facilitative, when actually the work that we do should be valued. And one way of valuing really good work is actually through financial recompense, right? Don't think there's anything particularly wrong with that, but in some way it's going to value more or less to you compared to some of these other things. A variety within the work that you do. Do you get really kind of stuffy at doing the same thing over and over again? That might tell you something. Security, perhaps compared to a sense of freedom, actually having the freedom of not fearing that you're going to lose it. Prestige compared to other people, do you really look for and value a sense of I suppose not so much being above people, but a sense of a bit of recognition socially. Morality and ethics, is there a particular moral code, a sense of ethical duty that you have that matters a lot to you? Intellectual stimulation, do you really value thinking in that kind of way? Contact with the public, is about that kind of exposure potentially for you. Pace, do you really look for either a sense of fast pace, or are you quite a kind of laid back person? Is that very high on your agenda as a professional? Or similarly, risk, I suppose slightly incongruous with teaching, because you don't really want to be too risky in the classroom, but as a professional, how highly do you value that sense of kind of wild excitement and abandon? It's actually quite good for you to feel like you're out of your comfort zone and actually trying something really new and dangerous. Cool. So if you've had a go at rating those, seeing some of those examples on the screen, hopefully that started some thinking for you. So if you haven't got a sense of your values already, I'd recommend just take 5 minutes, pause the video, and just scroll down for yourself. What, out of everything that we've talked about, of everything else that's kind of present for you, what would be the top 3 things, say, that you value as a professional? So, what do you most value getting right? Or what do you find most fulfilling in the work that you do? What are those kind of big non-negotiables that you really focus on, that really give meaning and vibrance to your work, particularly as a teacher? And I think, after that, it can be quite useful to think about a difference, maybe, or similarities between your values as an educator and potentially your other values as a creative professional, or in a wider sense within your life. Maybe there's a difference there, maybe there isn't. Maybe these things are so core that they kind of drive just your journey through life. To the learning outcome for this part of the Mod 1 assignment, this doesn't just ask for you to identify your values, kind of think about why they're important to you, where they came from. That's a big part of it. But if we look at the specific terminology, this asks for a critical discussion, right? And criticality in this sense, one of the meanings of the word is to draw in other perspectives. So to not just be okay with your own sense of yourself, but to actually contrast that with a couple of other points that can shine a light better on the values that you hold. And there are 2 things in particular that we would look at. Firstly, it's the idea of how we put these things into practice. What evidence is there in the room that you're living by these values? Well, not so well, where are the gaps? But firstly, I think it can be quite useful to look at, you've got these particular values that you hold. What other values do educators tend to hold? Are you kind of sitting within a common shared kind of collective understanding of what matters? Or are you a bit out on the fringes? Where are the differences? Where are the similarities? So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you another perspective, looking at those particular values that the professional community have judged to be central to the work of education. Now, there are various different professional bodies you might choose to look at. If you're working within further education, if you're working in schools, there will be particular groups of educators and different sets of values. But for us, we're just going to focus on one. So we're going to look at the Higher Education Academy, which is one professional body within HE. And they came up with this particular document, which has now become very central to the work that we do in higher education, both from a policy standpoint and trickling down to define particular curricular requirements, defining the work that institutions do in ensuring the quality of provision in higher education, and I think also directing the kind of quality of work that we do as individual practitioners. So this is a piece of work called the Professional Standards Framework, or the UK PSF, right? And it's all focused around setting a benchmark for what professionalism looks like from a practitioner's point of view within higher education. So yes, as we've said, this is the Higher Education Academy, or the HEA, and we'll be looking at various parts of the UK PSF over the course of the PG Cert. And it's one perspective that's really useful to use to inform our practice, and to kind of use as a lens to judge whether what we're doing is kind of up to that benchmark or not, for example. So as I've said, the framework is a set of particular descriptions of what's involved in the role of teaching and supporting learning within HE. So you can be a fellow of the Higher Education Academy without actually being a teacher. There are particular ways of joining the HEA if you're in a supportive role, as well as in a teaching role, or from a curricular standpoint. So really, they're looking at any of the functions of people that support student learning all the way up through their university studies. It's all done from the perspective of the practitioner, and they're expressed as three dimensions to what constitutes that practice of supporting learning, and they construct four descriptors, right, which kind of comprehensively cover all of the different roles within the HE environment. So it's a really big, very rigorous document that goes into everything that's involved and to what particular standard they expect professionalism should be met. And really, we can chalk this down to three areas, and they all interrelate. So if you think about the areas of activity, those things, those functions that we should be doing as teachers and supporters of learning, well, they are underpinned by the core knowledge that we have, the skills and the pieces of subject knowledge, pedagogic knowledge. It's informed by that, and in combination with the values that we hold. So your professional values plus your core knowledge equals doing the areas of activity to a particular standard. That's like the point of the whole thing, right? So focusing just on the values, we can come back and we can look at the UKPSF in more depth at another point. They really say there are four things as a professional person in higher education, four things that you should embrace and exemplify. So again, this is looking at those things that you believe in, you espouse, but then you actually exemplify, you show out, you do in the work that you undertake. So value one is respecting individual learners and diverse learning communities. So really this is about caring for people as individuals, respecting differences, and you can chalk this down to a million different things. This is about gender and race and culture and all of these things, but I think more specifically within BIMM as a member of the professional music world as well as academia, this is about genre, this is about discipline, this is about journalists and drummers and all these other people sharing a same sense of individuality and ownership and respecting the differences between people. Value two is promoting the participation in higher education and the equality of opportunity for learners. So while respecting where everyone's starting from and kind of viewing that, similarly they would say a value is okay, sure, you're starting from there. Well, actually everyone should have a shot at higher education in a particular kind of way. If we think about what makes higher education higher than say further education, there's a sense of, I don't know, criticality, thinking deeply about the world objectively. There are certain components of written academic writing. So there's a sense that as educators we should be promoting everyone to get the most from those particular processes. And higher education would be specific to our context as well. So whatever higher education in this sense means to the work that you do, this value is all about allowing everyone an equal shot at engaging with the value and the worth of the stuff that you're teaching. Value three is all about your development. So it's the fact that your learning as a professional is informed by evidence. It's not just kind of muddling your way through it. It's about using well-informed approaches, the outcomes of research, scholarship, and a commitment to your own professional development that's continual through your career, your CPD. And I suppose this has an academic component in terms of engaging with the relevant research scholarship, but it's also got a professional component. It's about there being a genuine undertaking of this work in the real world. So evidence can come from the evidence of your professional practice as much as it can come from other people's research evidence. And then finally, value four, it's about how higher education sits within the real world, right? So it's acknowledging the wider context in which higher education, or perhaps BIM as a particular organisation, operates. Recognising the implications for professional practice, for professionalism, for going out there into the world, getting employed, all of these things. So bursting out of that little bubble, the microcosm of the university that we work in, are you actually aware? Are you actually making links with other real activities, pursuits, professional bodies? The real music scene, I think, is a very key example. I think as an organisation, I think BIM seeks to do all of these things. You might argue to different varying degrees of success, but I think, institutionally, we're really bought into number 4. The thing that makes BIM compared to, say, a traditional research university is that it's all about that professionalism, right? You don't have to even reference the UKPSF within the assignment. I think it's useful though to broaden our perspectives in a way and inform a piece of academic writing with what other people have held to be the values that we ought to share, embrace and exemplify, right? So I think within the piece it can be useful to begin the discussion of how do my values relate to the values set by a particular professional body. What am I focused on more? What things are less important to me? Where's the crossover? Where's the gap? And actually, is there any thinking that's sparked by looking into these 4 particular values? So anything that I hadn't quite seen, to be important or to be kind of there and visible within my practice. So at this point, you don't need to, very explicitly analyze each of these 4 in any way. There's nothing prescriptive from our side we're looking for. It's, again, another viewpoint, another thought starter for you to be exploring those things that you find to be important. You've got your particular set of values. You've maybe thought about how they relate to what's generally important within the profession, within other professional bodies of educators. Well, great that you believe in them, great that you hold these values. We're now interested in to what extent do those values that you espouse actually translate into practice? In what way are you enacting them from something that you hold to something that you do? And I think this cartoon really resonates with me, right? Because it's completely incongruous. And I think it's very easy as professionals to say, to believe one thing, and then to do something slightly differently. Now we can all think of personal examples, within our lives of people that said one thing and did another. There are various examples you could draw from, say, the political sphere, or maybe some very extreme things where people are, being disingenuous or manipulative. But I think beyond that, there's a very real challenge in being a value-led professional, where it's not always easy to know what the right thing is. It's not always easy to put some of these high ideas into practice. So, for example, one of the values that I personally hold is surrounding lifelong learning. I think that I'm committed to my own growth as a professional and as a person, and I would seek to encourage that in my students as well, to take a real personal and kind of lifelong approach to growing and learning. So that's something that I espouse, and then the way that I enact it, for example, is I seek to promote that by modelling my own thought process, and by kind of showing how I'm still growing as a professional with my students. I do that with undergraduate, I do that on the PG Cert as well, I think. Similarly, secondly, encouraging my students to link these ideas from class, from their modules, to what they're doing in their lives, so to their past experiences, to their future careers. Right, so that's 2 ways in which I might seek to enact the espoused value that I hold, right? if I'm being reflective about that, I think that's somewhat successful. It often goes well, but I think there are genuine concerns with some of these approaches. You might worry that, modeling your own learning process could itself be a bit inhibiting, a bit disempowering to your students. I've seen educators walk into the room and it's all about them and about their growth, and frankly, that's a bit weird. Um, so I think it can both change the dynamic of a group, but also, potentially by providing too many of your own examples, even in a positive sense, well, maybe your students aren't learning how to do it for themselves. Maybe they're just learning and internalizing your own work process. Now, again, this isn't black and white. It's not like, oh, then those ways of enacting it are wrong, but potentially through that evaluation, through that reflection, you might find ways to better enact it. So either different options or ways to mitigate, some of the challenges or the negative aspects of what you're bringing, in lots of different ways, right? When approaching this as an essay piece, what I might recommend is a kind of two-part planning activity. So firstly, just get in 2 columns, list down the main professional values that you hold as a teacher, as an educator, as a supporter of learning. So the values that you espouse. And I think, regarding this as an essay, you've got 1,000 words, you do need to cherry pick a little bit. So I would say a maximum really of 3 professional values, maybe 2 if you're going to link it into a couple of different external frameworks. So just the main things that you really believe in, that matter, that drive the work that you do. Brilliant. Second column, in what ways do you currently put these into practice? What do you consciously do? What do you maybe unconsciously do to make those things true? For example, you might really value ensuring that your knowledge of teaching is as up to date as possible. Brilliant. One of the ways you might enact that is by reading widely, attending teaching conferences, that sort of thing. You might really value showing respect for all learners, and you can think of ways in which that, again, links to the UK PSF. A couple of ways of enacting that might be ensuring everyone is included in learning activities in session, maybe soliciting different points of view within discussions. Okay, so I'd say, if you're following along in the video, just take 5-10 minutes, jot that down. And then I think the second part is just adding this third piece, right? So you've got your espoused values, you've got your ways of enacting them. Thirdly, get a bit reflective. How successful actually are those things? Can you think of a clear example, say, where you've used group discussion, where you were soliciting different points of view? How did that go down? What are some specifics of student responses that you can remember? What was the vibe of the room? Were there, say, differences? Were there louder voices, quieter voices? Just get a bit more information in and see if you can judge for yourself how well you think those things are working. So particularly we're interested in the successes that you've had. I think it's brilliant to account for the real strengths in what you do, and also the challenges. These don't need to be total flops, but it's the grey areas, it's the ways in which you could be better. Potentially there's a bit of a values gap, between how you currently do things and where you want to be. That might be great, that might be small, but I think it's, you don't need to have no gap now. In fact, I don't think it's quite possible to have no gap. The idea of a value is something inherently idealistic. So still, where is the distance that you'd like to travel in order to more fully realise these things that matter to you? Cool. So that's really what this essay piece asks of you. I think there are a couple of different ways, beyond what we've looked at in terms of being critical, or you might want to discuss other ways in which your values are important, linking to your personal work, your personal life, other professional work. There are lots of other things that you might talk about. It's a very personal piece. By its nature, you're looking at the things that you value most. So these are some suggestions in terms of how you approach it, but really it's up to you. You've got the agency in meeting that learning outcome. But the whole reason this is within the PG Cert is because this is one of the starting blocks in order to doing really good action research, which is part of your PGO3. It is your PGO3 assignment. And by that I mean that action research, as opposed to just normal research, is value-led. So it's actually seeking to put the things that matter to you into practice much more visibly and clearly. So within action research, you're working to learn more about this, aspect of your practice that you've chosen, right? And that's the research. You're investigating something you're less sure of, you want to know more about, in order to improve it. And it's about trying new things out in the classroom. That's the action bit of this action research. So the starting point is to ask ourselves, to what extent are we able to fully enact our values in our work? Again, where are the gaps? You might pick one of your values as the starting ground for module 3. You might not, but I think it's certainly it's actually quite essential within action research to have identified at least the framework of what matters to you, because that's one part of the landscape for how you work as a professional. Bringing it from the unconscious to the conscious, whether you choose it or not as the main focus, you need to account for it. Cool. So that's it for this video. I think you've got more than enough to work with, a couple of different perspectives on this part of your Module 1 assignment. If you've got any further questions or you want some particular support working through this assignment piece, please just book in a tutorial with myself or one of the other course tutors. All of our booking information is available on the course admin page of the WordPress blog. So that's it for now, guys. Take care.